It's already been recorded. Awesome.
I'm good.
All right, so we are going to get started as more people join in. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the first event of our fall seminar series. I am Sadaf Khaber, the co-chair of the Autism Special Interest Group, which is part of ABCT. Our SIG focuses on work that is aligned with the priorities of the autistic community, which includes promoting meaningful clinical care. To get to know more about our several initiatives, you can visit us on our website and also follow us on Blue Sky. We have exciting events coming up, including the next seminar series events on the 26th of September, later this month, and the 17th of October. So mark those dates on your calendar. We also have some great activities coming up at the annual conference in New Orleans. Specifically, the 20th of November is when we're having a pre-conference event. More details coming up shortly. And our annual meeting, or the business meeting as we call it, will be on the 21st. So again, mark your calendars for that. We hope to see several of you there. We rely on donations to support our travel awards, virtual seminar series events, and other events every year. So as always, we encourage our attendees to consider donating. It goes a very long way. Without any further delays, I invite Allison, the co-chair for our seminar planning committee, to introduce our incredible guest for today. Over to you, Allison.
Thank you, Sadaf. All right, we are very excited today to welcome both Matt Lerner and Ava Gurba. I can pronounce names. Matt is an associate professor and leader of the Life Course Outcomes program area in the A.J. Drexel Autism Institute at Drexel University. He's also co-founder and research director of the Stony Brook Autism Initiative at Stony Brook University. Dr. Lerner's research focuses on understanding emergence and real-world implications of social challenges, especially among those with autism, as well as development, evaluation, and dissemination of novel, evidence-based approaches for ameliorating those challenges. He has worked to develop clinical and community-based programs to both improve the quality of life for autistic people and to improve understanding of both the science and lived experience of autism among those who work in the field. He has published over 150 peer-reviewed articles and book chapters. He serves as associate editor of the Journal of Autism and Developmental Disorders and on the editorial boards of 7 other academic outlets, as well as the past treasurer and member of the board of directors of the International Society for Autism Research. Dr. Lerner has received grants from organizations including the National Institutes of Health, Patient-Centered Research Outcomes Institute, or PCORI, the Health Resources and Services Administration, the Brain and Behavior Research Foundation, the WITH Foundation, the Simons Foundation, the Medical Foundation, the APA, the Society of Clinical and Adolescent Psychology, the American Academy of Arts, and the American Academy of the Arts and Sciences. He is also a fellow of Division 53 of the APA. Ava Gurba is a senior research associate in the Social Connections and Treatment Lab in the Life Course Outcomes program, also at the A.J. Drexel Autism Institute at Drexel University. She holds both a Master's of Science in Neuroscience and a Bachelor's of Science in Biology from Stony Brook University. Her research spans a wide range of topics, including community perspectives on autism, neurodiversity affirming interventions, mental health and autism, autistic identity, and mental health and autism. She also develops and delivers training on autism and neurodiversity to various audiences. Her work often utilizes participatory research approaches that partner directly with autistic people, family members, professionals, and other community members as key research team members, and not just as research participants. Ava herself identifies as neurodivergent and disabled. She has an extensive background in disability advocacy, particularly within higher education. In 2020, she co-founded and co-ran the nonprofit called Disabled in Higher Education, led by a small team of disabled students, staff, faculty, and allies, which aimed to advance awareness, inclusion, and understanding for disabled people across all levels of higher education around the world. Between 2020 to 2023, Disabled in Higher Education ran virtual events, held conference panels, led trainings, built resources, led a mentorship program, and took part in other activities to improve understanding and create community for disabled people in academia. Ava was an Autistic Self-Advocacy Network Autism Campus Inclusion Leadership Academy Fellow, and that's a program that we love that builds community organizing and disability policy skills for advocates and scholars working as part of the autistic and disabled communities. We are both honored and thrilled to have both Matt and Ava with us today and together with one another today, which I feel like is particularly special. We never get to see speakers in the same window. So without any further ado, I'm going to let them take over, and we are so excited to hear what you have to share with us.
Thank you so much, Allison.
Sorry, I think the last comment we wanted to make, Matt, was just that you all were asking that folks put any questions that they might have in the chat, but that you'll respond to those at the end. Is that correct, Ava and Matt?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you both. We're looking forward to it.
Yeah. Allison, I think speakers in the same window could be a subtitle for this whole speaker series.
Although I'm
Well
not,
done.
although unfortunately I don't think
Perhaps-
the rest of them would.
Perhaps not literally. All right, so we're going to, oh, it's not on present yet. Sorry. There we go. Cool. So we're gonna forego any other introduction of ourselves in that way because of Allison's wonderful and detailed intro, which can get kind of right on to comment to discussion. Kind of broadly, we're here talking as part of a sort of mini speaker series about kind of neurodiverse partnerships in academia and research. And I think maybe the goal overall is to just sort of show and talk about all of the different, really candidly, about the different ways and shapes that these things can take. I think very often it's the case that particularly when you hear about collaboratives and partnerships that where particularly as aspiring autism researchers and clinicians, you're like, that sounds great. And did it just like somebody wave a magic wand and make that happen, and then everybody's kumbaya and everything's easy, right? That's how that works. And the answer is, of course, it doesn't work that way. So I think if I'm right, our goal is to sort of share both one particular trajectory, but then also some of the bumps along the way to show that it's not, always that straightforward, and it's ever evolving.
I also think in the field, we talk about these things very generally and arbitrarily, and often I don't think you often also get to hear from both perspectives simultaneously. I often think a lot of the perspectives come either from like the non-autistic researcher being like, this is what my partnerships are like. And again, I think it also feels easier than it is. Or you hear from the autistic person or the disabled person and what that looks like. And so I think our talk is a unique opportunity in hearing from both of us simultaneously, and both sides of the strengths and our story, as well as the challenges and how we have continued to try to overcome them and evolve.
So again, these things just told you about trying a lot, and I think importantly, there's no one size fits all. We're talking about doing this different routes, and hopefully the discussion can be a rich talk about how people are kind of trying to navigate that or thinking about that themselves. And also trying to, give you some examples of barriers that, you might be able to anticipate along the way, and also maybe some that you can't.
I think, again, Allison gave us really, really lengthy an intro, so I don't have to say most of this, but my name is Ava Gurba. My pronouns are she and her. I'm not going to give the formal title or my degrees because that was just said, but I do think the last point on this slide is that, I have many identities, as again, evidenced by Allison's intro as well, disabled person, self-advocate, disability advocate, or activist. I also am a family member of several individuals with disabilities, developmental disabilities. I'm a community member and collaborator. I did a lot of volunteer work in my thing. I was a student and still in many ways am researcher, question mark. And I think I put all of those things on this slide because I find that my path into the work that Matt and I are currently doing in our own partnership has not been traditional in many ways, and all of those roles have been active in different ways at the same time.
And I won't reiterate, the stuff that Allison shared, except that just note my pronouns are he, him. And, I also have several different roles, but I think as most pertinent to this discussion, it's, aspiring ally advocate, emphasis on the aspiring. I think very importantly in, moving in more and more over my career into this space, realizing that that is an ongoing process, and that anytime you feel like you're done and you've got it right and you know exactly what to do, that's the first indication you're wrong and should rethink your assumptions. And so, we'll talk about that ongoing process a little bit. And then I'm also a learner. Aha. All right. So you want to start?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I generally know the beginning of this better. So Matt and I, Matt was the very first professor I actually met at college ever. My very first like one-to-one meeting outside of a big lecture hall. I was connected to Matt by the at the time the Autism Awareness Club president, who told me I should go talk to this guy, Matt Lerner. As I was 3 weeks into college, and they were like, yeah, you should go talk to him. I was like, okay, send him an email and go. And so that was all the way back in October of 2014. So Matt and I have known each other for now almost 11 years. And our journey, that's when our journey started. I think that first meeting was very telling for me, at least, being a 3-week old college student, knowing very little about the world of academia and the world of even higher education at that point, and what college was going to be like. Approaching Matt was wildly intimidating, and I think our first conversation, Matt, and feel free to add, was very difficult. I think you didn't know what to do with me. You're like, why is this like freshman showing up at my office? And I, in my original email, and then I reiterated the entire thing when I met you, like my life story was very much how I used to introduce myself. Like, yes, I'm Ava, I was diagnosed, I'm autistic, blah, blah, blah. I have potentially this interest, but I have no idea about it. And you sat there and you were like, so what do you want to do with that? Like, why are you here? And I think it was a very difficult conversation to have, because I think we just, from the beginning, did not meet each other where we were wanting, both because I think of the gap in knowledge, and also the expectations of that meeting, and whatnot. And I think the detail that most explicitly stands out to me is the fact that you told me I should explore the field of disability studies, with which I was very frustrated with at the time, being a college student that really strongly wanted to go into something like neuroscience, and was like, why are you telling me that?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I still remember that meeting well as well, despite it being about a decade. And I think, one of the things that happens, particularly in academic environments, and this relates both to expectations and also social norms a little bit, is, we never have enough time for ourselves, for the work we want to do, for the many, for many students. And so I think we try our best to put bounds around that. And those bounds are designed in some ways to be self-protective and to protective of the people we work with, but they also, the implication for others, particularly students, and I think particularly for neurodivergent students for whom it may be quite much more of a risk and an effort to stick their neck out and say, hey, I'm going to try to engage with you. Those bounds can be really challenging and sometimes even harmful. if we're not thoughtful about them. And I think that that very first meeting was a good example of that, where, I was like, sit in my office. I don't even think it was my posted office hours. A student came and knocked on my door. I was like, why is this person talking to me? It's not my office hours.
I mean, we made an appointment, so you did know I
Oh,
was coming.
Fair
Yes.
enough.
Yeah.
Yeah, even so, I was like, I don't know, I've got, 10 minutes. What are we doing? All right, great. It seems like she wants my advice about what career trajectory I can give that. And I thought I was doing a good job by being like, I've listened to you and I've given you this feedback that maybe you're interested in disability studies. And clearly I did not listen well enough because that was not, what you were looking for. And the reason this section is called slamming doors, literally and figuratively, is that when Ava left my old door at Stony Brook.
Well, this is a little bit further.
Oh, fair
Yeah.
enough. But when it would close, sometimes it would swing hard and slam shut, not intentionally, but certainly it can be received that way. And so I think when I closed the door, it slammed hard, and I think Ava took that very much, right, like, all right, fair enough,
Well,
you slammed a door in my face.
that was a little bit later.
Okay.
I mean, I think the thing that did happen though is that initial meeting set up I think for us a very complicated dynamic to get
Yeah.
over. And for me, I felt like everything, Matt and I, as an autistic person in the community that we were in at the time at Stony Brook, which was a very kind of small, tight-knit
Yeah.
autism community. After I met Matt, he would show up in many places. I would go to community events. I'd be out trying as a autistic person trying to access services and be at community events. And it's like, oh yeah, Dr. Matt Lerner is presenting at this, and every time I think in those initial few years, because we would bump into each other over like my freshman, sophomore, and junior year and be like, oh my God, he doesn't like me. I have this is adversarial. There's no reason why we get along from that initial meeting. I after several years, I ended up taking two classes with you though. The first one was Intro to Developmental Psychology, and then the second one was Autism Spectrum Disorders. And I think up until that point, it had really everything really accumulated to be very adversarial and and also very much about a power dynamic. And I think the thing that's when the slamming door happened, because that's when I did show up to your office the one time.
Sorry,
And
yeah.
without it, and you were like, Ava, I'm in a meeting and I don't have time for you. And you did kind of physically slam the door, mostly because you were probably having like 10 things happen at once. And, I was a student who was like, yeah, I just, it was after class. I showed up for 5 minutes. And I think that really resonated and made that initial kind of interaction very adversarial. Like that just solidified that for me for many years. And I think, that made, being a person in the community, constantly bumping into you, being in an academic environment, and also being the kind of campus expert at Stony Brook, the true generalized autism expert at the university, often also caused a lot of people to constantly around the university send me back to you, in terms of like, but academic opportunities, but also, I think in some really interesting ways about like talking about disability accommodations, like you should consult on that, or you should consult on like professional development and career development. And it was, I think this expectation that like, yeah, no, I'm not the person for you, Ava. I work in the career center. And as you as an autistic person, you need to go see the autism expert. They're the ones that can do the modifications, which is also, I think, a wildly challenging problem for the university to continue to present as like in these different departments that are clearly responsible for the challenge for the different pieces, being like, we can't accommodate you, we can't talk to you. Go find the autism expert.
Yeah, and I think that what happens, or at least what happened for me, and I imagine happens sometimes for other people, is when you sort of start to be known as that, there is this expectation to be many things. and the expectation to be not only a professor who teaches about stuff, but is especially understanding and knows everything about accommodations and can guide the disability office, or the expectation to know and guide people towards services and clinical opportunities, not to mention all the research opportunities. And on the one hand, that's a great, there's something really wonderful about being in the position that people say, okay, you maybe know something and can share that. On the other hand, that's quite a lot. It's a undue amount of responsibility that it really isn't fair, honestly, often to the students, and in this case, to Ava, to sort of saying like, all right, you have to keep going back to this person. They're supposed to be the sort of solve of all things and the knower of all things. And it does create this weird dynamic that makes it very hard, or can create a dynamic where it makes it very hard to then, know how to begin to engage, even if your intentions are sincere and you want to provide support, because you're like, my support can be this, can't be all of the things.
Yeah.
And I think related to that too, there then is also these expectations in some of these environments to know things, right? There's the expectation, at least on my part in this story, to sort of be the keeper of all knowledge related to anything related to autism at all, which is just not true. It's just not, nobody is.
Well, and that you have this unmatched power to be like, I can access the service systems,
Right.
and I can come up
Right.
with,
Which is just,
academic and
right.
career plans, and I can,
which is
yeah.
just not true. But I don't. But I think the flip of that too is these dynamics, particularly when you're talking about as a student looking to maybe develop a professional relationship or collaboration or mentorship with a faculty member, there's also an expectation to know certain things that way too, right? To know the social norms of what and when and where and how, and the fact that, talking about this here makes it harder there. Like, that's a lot to put on. It's a lot for anybody, like for anyone on this call who's been a student trying to reach out, and now add in all of the layers of social complexity and associated with neurodivergence, and it gets hard.
I increasingly also, I think after, this was between 2014 and like 2019, I think in that period, I became increasingly angry just at you for always being the expert that I have to go back to, and then starting to just knowingly reject that.
Yeah.
At the same time, my interests in autism and autism research continue to grow.
Yeah.
And so I think particularly to the people who are graduate students or undergraduate students, or who have been in the room, I applied to work with Matt as a research assistant for many times. I think I applied 3 times, and I got rejected every time after our initial meeting, which again only added, I think, to the adversarialness. And then I think,
although again, I think there's also an interesting social norm thing there, because for
Yeah.
the most part, not by me, right? Because the way our lab worked, like in many labs, right? Like the PI wasn't necessarily
you weren't necessarily, the first time you were a little bit, that was much earlier though. And then definitely not later. And I think that made me give up on like that sort of field of work, especially in terms of, neuroscience. And so I graduated with my bachelor's in 2019, and then I went on to my master's in the Department of Neurobiology, which also then culminated in this very unique situation where there was an expectation to meet with you,
Yeah.
to develop a career path through, and also a research path in my master's program.
Right.
And I remember by that point, I was like, I've been rejected by this person and his team 3 or 4 times. We've had all of these interactions that haven't been positive. I think there wasn't any level of trust. And I remember going to meet with you and the director of my master's program and sitting in your office for an hour, and the director of my master's program, who was really trying his best. I could see he was really trying to find a path for me, knowing, the challenges of being a disabled person in science. But I also think he was like, so Ava, what do you want to do? And then you would ask me that. He would be like, Matt, can you like lead the conversation about what Ava wants to do? And I sat there and it was just at that point silence. And then interestingly, I was like, this is never going to work. It's never going to happen. So I gave up. And then suddenly COVID-19 happened. And that was a very strange time to be a grad student, trying to do research, especially in neuroscience that required a lot of in-person engagement, because wet lab and science requires a lot of that. And I was experiencing a lot of challenges with my master's program and finding research experiences that were going to fit and serve me well, given the nature of the sorts of things I wanted to do, but also my disability. And so after trying for about almost all of 2020 from March to December or October, one of my colleagues and friends in the autism community out in the community on Long Island in New York reached out to you and was like, I'm working with this girl who is quite brilliant. Will you take her on? And she met with you directly. And that's when I caved in. I think in many ways that was very scary for me because up to that point, our relationship had not been super positive. I also at that point gave up on potentially going into working in autism in that way. And I did a master's in neuroscience that I'm doing work in kind of neurobiology. And I felt like in the moment that I joined your team, I had to give up that path. And that was very hard. And so it was like I'm entering an environment I don't feel like I belong in, while also giving up the things I wanted to do.
So I think in some ways, what we're mapping here is this evolving understanding, and the fact that also, and I hope the theme here that folks are hearing is one of persistence, right? And that, things don't always track with initial, expectations, or even for periods of time, more than initial. And also that, being open to evolution. So, for Ava, there's this, again, evolving interest in reading the literature, and kind of that starting to actually move more towards the kind of work that my team did. I have a very vivid memory of actually a very positive interaction that, not all of them were negative during this period, where after class, I had been talking about a particular construct, talking about sort of actually some of the measurement issues and complexities around theory of mind and ways we can sort of maybe rethink it. And Ava, walked with me back to my office from class and shared with me what were at the time some of the most insightful comments I'd ever heard from an undergrad. And I was like, wow, all right, these ideas are really coming along, and she's got something going here, and just sort of kept that in my pocket. I think for myself too, I think starting to connect around those interests. Ava also would occasionally is very prolific as a digester of articles, and would do things like read cool articles in the field and then write me an email occasionally being like, hey, I read this and these are my thoughts. And I really started to, again, can we connect and appreciate her way of thinking around around research and depth of thought. And I've also, I think, always valued lived experience to a degree in my work, but I think increasingly more explicitly making that a focus has become, became, I don't know, the last 8 years or so, more and more like the center of what I'm trying to do. And I think it's very hard as a sort of more traditionally trained clinical psychologist to sort of get to the how of that. You can have kind of the abstract idea, yes, of course, we should listen to autistic people, great idea. But then how do we sort of knit that together with what we know from a rich empirical literature? And one of the things Ava was and remains extremely good at is doing both, saying, here's what we know, here's what we're hearing from the community. Here's what this paper says, and here's the way these things are not quite, like this research is not quite there yet. And I really started learning a lot from those discussions. And ultimately, a lot of that, started to really influence my research focus as a PI, as a lab director, and which started to be much more about saying, how do we much more directly, not, follow and work with and from the priorities of the autism community.
I think I think once I joined your team and I started sharing with you, which again, I think was a huge risk at the time.
Yeah.
But I thought it was the easiest way I could use my skills to find connection is in sending those random emails and being like, here's two things I just read, and here's what I thought about them. I think that was the start of trying to build trust between the two of us. When I started working with Matt as a master's student in his lab, though, I was very secretive. I was very much a member of the team that benefited from the name and presence on the team, but I was very much doing my own thing for many years, for the at least first 2 years of working together.
Yeah.
I would often go up to Matt, or when we had conversations, which was often like once every 9 months at that point, would be like, yeah, I'm working on some secret projects that I cannot tell you about, and you will not know what I'm doing, and you will not know. And so I think that was incredibly, I think you were like, okay, Ava, I'm glad, thanks for letting me know.
It is very fascinating. I don't know. Maybe it is a strategy if we're talking about strategy, building collaboration. Because I have to say, getting stuck in my head, I was like, why is she telling me that? Like, is she telling me that because she wants me to ask? Is she telling me that because one day these secrets are to be revealed to me? She's telling me that to be like, I don't trust you, and I'm letting you know that I'm doing things that are not part of the things we're doing together, and you need to know that. And the answer is probably some combination of all of those things,
Yeah.
right? But it was really interesting approach. And of course, importantly, and I do think this is an important, piece of insight or feedback is, I also try to be very respectful of that. So I didn't, even if she would kind of drop a hint about that, I would say, all right, unless, this is going to be, if she wants to share this, it's not my place to inquire further, other than to say, I'm glad to hear it.
I also, around this time, and I think this was actually incredibly important to the progress of my own development and also our relationship. As my master's program went on and I was facing a lot of difficulties, COVID was an exceptionally important time for me in terms of network building. And I think one of the biggest things that actually, in some ways, at least in the background, made it easier for us to start working together slowly was the network I was building of other collaborators and projects that I was working with outside working with you.
Yep.
And, I was very fortunate to meet a number of autistic researchers who particularly played important mentorship roles and were, in many ways my primary projects and collaborations at the time, that I started working with Matt. And again, I think it lended to the potential for more openness, even though I kept most of that work at the time secretive.
Mm-hmm.
I also think, our relationship had to be moderated initially by a lot of both for necessity of time, because you honestly did not have time to talk to every student at the time for long periods of time. I spent a lot more time with the grad students, particularly the PhD students, that were in your lab, and getting to know them and building relationships with them, which I think made it easier for me to access the lab environment and eventually a relationship with you. I think my greatest moment during this period, where I felt the most proud of myself in the things that I was independently building, was Matt and I finally built up enough of a network, professional network, independently of you, to have been invited to a project / series of groups discussions that would hopefully lead to some sort of practical project outcome that we would collaborate with across a bunch of autism and autistic researchers across the world. And the group is now called CAPBID, Centering Autistic Perspectives, Behavioral Intervention Discussion.
Say more about it later.
I got invited by one of my closest colleagues, and you got invited by the other close colleague that was leading this. And my colleague at the time was like, I want you to know that Matt is coming. Do you want him to know that? And I was like, no, I want to show up and I want it to be a surprise. And I felt very proud of myself, I think, to be thought of as highly by my colleagues, to be invited independently of you. But I think that opportunity, though, in getting to finally sit in the room together and work together was one of the first times we had that opportunity.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think it really highlights too that, you know, these processes, these evolving processes, and can involve both shared and overlapping, you know, networks, but also do involve independent, you know, growth and network building too, and how those things can intersect very, you know, importantly. And then that moved towards, you know, more direct, true collaboration. One of my grad students, Jackie Cates, and Ava and I actually came together to develop a training program called the Introduction to the Science and Lived Experience of Autism, which we'll tell you more about later. But that was really our first opportunity to say, okay, we're building a project kind of together from scratch. And it was in a way an aggregation of many of the things I've learned over the years, because learned over the years from spending time with Ava, even those emails, the long emails that were like, oh, how do we integrate, you know, the scientific perspective and lived experience perspective on this idea? I was like, well, who do I know who can really do that well? I have years and years and years of seeing Ava do that incredibly well. Let's build this together. And so we built this online training program. And then we had this neat opportunity to, as part of that, there was a conference in Philadelphia on continuing ed
education.
Yeah, continuing ed professionals. It's a continuing ed education program, and we were invited to speak at it. And it's like, all right, let's go speak together. And we road tripped from Long Island to Philly. And you know, as you commented on the time, despite knowing each other for many years, it was the first time we really spent significant amount of time just one-to-one in a space.
Oh, and I think it was important. It was an important time period for us to build our kind of growing relationship and friendship and deepening those parts of this.
Yeah.
That really, I think, started to solidify some trust.
Yeah.
Between those two, building the ILEA, the training program, and then being able to do that.
Yeah. Yeah. And we listened to some good music.
Actually, it was podcasts.
It was both. Podcasts up, music back. Anyway, so finally, in 2023, I was offered and accepted the opportunity to take the position here at the Drexel Autism Institute. And as part of this position, I was offered the chance to bring a certain number of faculty, students, and staff with me. I think you were the first person I asked, actually, who was
Really?
a grad student. Yeah.
Yeah, and that makes sense. Yeah.
And the idea was, you know, what's the kind of work that I want to be doing now for the next, I don't know, decades of my career, and what do I want to build with this opportunity to be part of this wonderful, really kind of groundbreaking institute, and to try to kind of contribute to that. And I thought a lot about the work that we were doing together and the direction and the directionality of that. And I was like, this is where we want to be and go. And so I said, let's, you know, hopefully you'll come. And I know that was a big risk too, because you never lived off Long Island.
No, I always lived on Long Island. As a disabled person at this time, I was really trying to figure out what my next step was. I was in a lot of voc rehab services that was pushing me to get a job. And I remember through when we started really collaborating on ILEA, it was really hard because I kept looking for a job and kept getting rejected. And there were lots of different stressors around that, because it was like, what am I doing? How am I doing it? And so when you offered me the job, I took the really big risk of leaving everything I had known, my social support networks, services to really move here to step professionally up and take a job.
Yeah.
I think because we had a strong relationship, that was the one thing that mediated my sense of like willingness to make that risk, because I wasn't doing this with someone, I wasn't taking a job with a company or a lab that I don't know anything about, and I would maybe be even more stressed out. And so I decided to join Matt on his journey. I was the first one, I think, that joined you physically too.
But I think it's very telling that you say that, given where we started, right?
Mhm.
10, 8, 5, 6, 7, 8 years earlier, mostly would not that trust probably wouldn't have been there to do that.
Yeah.
So now we're sort of, in the ongoing evolution phase. And I think, the key things is just not, I want to be clear, this does not end at kumbaya and now everything is great and easy and wonderful. A lot of the work that we do here, we're focusing on both in our work and research work, but also even in terms of the environment we're creating here is focused on sustainability. How do we create a sustainably inclusive and welcoming space that respects different needs? How do we, support like transitions, right? Like, coming here and not having a social network or either.
Well, in my transition to that, given all of the different challenges, has been really difficult, and has been incredibly important to have colleagues to rely on. And for the different things, Matt and I talk a lot about our partnerships and interdependence and the ways in which those things really try to align up. And so we, over the last now 2 years since we've been here, been really working, personally in our day-to-day and in our research work on how to do that in a way that respects each other's needs and truly meets both the needs and the needs of the broader community of people that we have here too. And that can be tough, right? It is a I think a key factor here is, we really have at this point, because of that trust, a willingness to discuss when things get tough, when people's, things are unclear or too hard, or, dynamics aren't making sense, right? There's a lot of openness to have those discussions, and also openness to the idea that this I hope one thing you're taking away is this is a continued process of trial and error. Right, it is, and we're going to always make mistakes. And then try to learn from them. So some themes, just because I want to make sure we have time as well for some Q&A. People are thinking about, a couple take homes is, creating safe space for conversations and thinking about how you get to those safe spaces. Right, for us, a lot of it was this particular background, but understanding that like a safe space to be supportive or critical, to be to bad ideas around is really important. I've been critical of Matt, and I think, I appreciate you being receptive over the years and trying to work with me to figure out how to make that criticism productive when it needs to come. In the work that we're doing. Appreciate that. And, and that can be hard too. And that's important as a PI to think about, do you have the, you gotta have a thick enough skin to be willing to take that. Professional and personal boundaries, thinking about, where those are. One of the things we know from the employment and autism literature is that one of the best ways to support sustainable employment for autistic adults in almost any environment is having a clear touch point, a person with whom to discuss, interpersonal stuff, but then also for there to be roles that transcend just sort of, traditional professional bounds or traditional personal bounds, that there is some sense of trust and authenticity. But that be also being explicit and open in discussions about those boundaries to say, look, this is true, but I have to do X, right? I personally have 3 kids at home and I'm often doing a lot of the parenting in my house. So, my boundaries often have to be very clear. Otherwise I can't meet my family obligations. But it's also, I think, about being flexible. And getting to know the person where. Right. Well, and being, again, coming up with this sense of interdependence that works for both people. Right. And you're right, because it is like we are all interdependent humans, not just purely independent humans. And that's especially true when you're doing this kind of, neurodivergent collaboration.
I think we're often talking about, both renegotiating power structures and non-traditional mentorship. What that means is that, there are certain projects that we work on where, the power dynamic is much more, at parity, and others where it's more traditional, and understanding too that in terms of non-traditional mentorship, often sometimes that goes both ways. I hope one thing that's clear from this discussion is, in the years we've worked together, I feel like I've learned, at least as much from Ava as she's learning from me, and we get to keep working on that. And I think that also gets to this idea of acknowledging and giving credit that, part of, particularly in academia, there's a tendency for the credit to sort of redound to the, lab director or the PI or the senior author. And I think that can also, if that happens too much, that can impact trust. And so one of the things we try to do is, anyway, is be really active and open about shared partnerships, shared roles, to not just be a, to not assume that credit. We also, have to think about when to be an ally, right? What spaces in which, being an ally for one's colleague is important, and also what times you have to be more a more open advocate. And this is true for individual colleagues, and in general true for sort of, really modeling spaces where you can have neurodiverse, neurodivergent, faculty, staff, students, etc. So, and it takes being willing to really kind of stand up for that. And again, the term I use a lot is, sort of putting money where mouth is. And I think it's also important to note that every relationship is unique, right? We've tried to take a little time to map this particular one that we've developed as an example, but that unity and partnership, I hope, is also clear, take time and care and sometimes persistence, and sometimes can show up in places you hadn't expected.
It just took us a lot of time too. I think time is also a very important element.
Yeah. Speaking of time, we want to be mindful of time for questions, but we do want to say, what's nice is that then you can get to a point where we're able to get to a point where some real concrete, products and things come out of this that we can be really proud of. We have a shared paper with our wonderful colleague Dina Gassner in GCCP on sort of creating a framework for what neurodiversity affirming interventions are, and we have some grants related to this now too. We co-edited an issue of Frontiers in Psychiatry on autism and stigma that Ava really led the charge on, and led the lead editorial on this process. That CapBid team that we mentioned earlier is now funded by a large PCORI grant with me and Dina as PIs, as well as an amazing group, including Ava, who are the key leadership team for that project. We have another PCORI grant with that Ava and I are co-leading, called Enhancing Mental Health Practices for Autistic Adults, collaborative team. And we are still offering this ILEA program that I mentioned. In fact, we're offering it right here from Drexel. So if you want to, point your cursor at the QR code, we are happy to share information about that.
Well, and I think ILEA in particular, we've continued kind of the shared partnership and really expanded that with other autism scholars, with clinicians and researchers, as well as more of our autistic advocates and scholars. And that pairing of expertise, lived and professional across all domains, is really highlighted through this course. So if you're interested in learning more about our program or any other program, please feel free to reach out to us.
Yeah. And we just want to also acknowledge, our amazing colleagues and collaborators who are also part of this seminar series. So Dina Gassner and Lauren Moskowitz their talk title is Being Brave, which is Friday, September 26th. And then Marinike Jua-Naiwu and Elizabeth Lee Hasrick are going to be talking about equity and collaboration on October 17th. We just want to also take a moment to acknowledge our amazing teams here, the broader autistic community, our friends, families, mentors, trainers, trainees, partners, and the SIG for hosting this series. And to kick it off for our last 10-ish minutes, we had some questions that for those who aren't sure what to ask or might want to talk about, these are some things that might be fun to discuss.
Although I think we're open to everyone else's questions too.
This is true. So I see one. Oh, Caitlin, did you want to do it, or?
I'm happy to read the questions from the Q&A. If you can see, there are two in there.
Mhm.
One is, what advice do you have for neurodivergent students interested in a research career who want to connect with other members of the autism research community?
I feel like this is one of those questions Matt and I get a lot. I always feel weird answering this question because I like unfortunately fell into this situation. I do think, Matt, your point earlier about being really persistent. I think Matt and I started in 2014 as well, which was, I think at this point, a very different time in autism research. I think there weren't as many autistic colleagues and other sorts of work that really highlighted that. And I think not just with our team, but has grown more broadly, which has made it easier. And I think there are lots of researchers and teams looking to collaborate with other students and mentor them up. So I think being persistent, I think doing your research and trying to find potential collaborators that align with your interests, that you feel like you can be really self-determined about, and persistent with trying to follow up and advocate. I also think, again, I think one thing that I focused on early, and again, I fell into, but did a lot of work around, was trying to build a network of folks. And sometimes those partnerships and building that network was very slow. It was sometimes just very early conversations as a student, but continuing to have them. And then eventually some of my colleagues came back to me and be like, I've had these great conversations with Ava, I should invite her to kind of join projects and stuff. And so I think the persistence, the willingness to do that, I think, I think as I've grown, I've come to understand my own interests more, which has also made it easier. I think, Matt, again, when I first showed up, I was very young and I did not know what I wanted, and of course, I think that shaped my entire approach. But I think if I had figured out and I was further along before that happened, maybe it would have also been different.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think also, there are some of these networks now. I mean, first of all, one is like get involved with this SIG, where there's a lot of interest from researchers across career stages, in meeting and connecting with and uplifting folks. I mean, I think the ASD SIG has really evolved itself into being a great space for that. I also know like INSAR has a network that you can, I forget what it's called, but you can log on.
The ICCR.
Yes, ICCR. I don't remember what it stands for, but it's a tool that you can sign up for where researchers can reach out to you if you're interested or have questions. So I think tapping into these existing networks at this point that, as Eva said, didn't really exist in the same way 11 years ago. Let's see, which one do you want to take?
I mean, I could do the principle of disability justice really quickly.
Okay.
I mean, I think highlighted by this talk, I think it is leadership by the most impacted. And I think Matt and I have grown in partnership in doing that, which I think is a very unique way to do that here. But I think he's also respected my leadership on many of the projects that we just talked about.
Let's see. Fantastic discussion and insights. Thank you both. I struggle with helping my academic colleagues who are not in the field develop empathy and skills, neurodiversity affirming approaches to mentorship of autistic students. Any insight about how to start and or create sustainable culture shifts in the education system would be appreciated. Thanks in advance. Yeah, I mean, I want to acknowledge that this is a really hard one. I get a lot of, emails and calls and things like this often, because I think there are a lot of sort of institutional and structural barriers, particularly around norms and expectations. A lot of the stuff that I sort of shared at the beginning of this discussion, exist in even larger measure if this is not an area that you focus on or think about. I think, to some extent, look, there's a literature around this now. There are trainings, like ILE actually is a training that, we've given to some academics who sort of has helped shift their focus.
Right.
But I think broadly, I think seeing, I think the one of the best ways, almost always, right, to build empathy for populations and communities the folks don't understand is to have that direct experience and access. And so I think if there are, if you have the opportunity to openly and with obviously everyone's consent and disclosure consent, share the existence of your, the neurodiversity affirming, communities or labs or teams, it can provide much more of a reframe than people might think.
I have lots to say to this question. I started an entire nonprofit on this issue,
Yeah,
on this
right.
exact issue, and I have long, since I was a very young undergrad, found the issues with affirming and meaningful approaches to mentorship of just diverse people with all different backgrounds to be an issue across academia and education. I started an entire nonprofit for this reason in 2020 because I was so angry about it. It is definitely a slow and steady process. I'm very glad that I was a part of that work, and at the time it was also a very big risk. And I found success in showing up to events and things with people around my university in particular, as well as I actually worked very closely with colleagues at different universities that also allowed me insight into trying to shift some of this. We were able to set up successful training programs for faculty and staff around the university to make those changes, as well as some other programmatic changes. We helped set up sensory rooms around campus and whatnot. While I don't think it shifted entire systems, I think doing that work has been incredibly important.
The next question, maybe last one, unless we have time for more, is how do you approach colleagues in research on creating a more supportive environment for neurodivergent individuals? I think some of the things we're talking about here, but I think like anything else, often these things might be more about, incremental processes and showing that, to do that even a little bit more than they're doing already isn't hard, right? Creating, thinking about, sensory supports or, pacing out your lab meetings or creating mentorship structures within labs where folks can have, partners to learn from and connect with. None of those things is very hard to do. Maybe all of them at once might feel very hard to do. But even doing a couple of them can really do a lot. And I think one theme I think I've learned spending more time thinking really explicitly about this is that there are things that might feel like, for lack of a better term, kind of, performative, like saying, all right, like we're going to have, squishies at our meetings, or we're going to make sure we're taking the time and making space for processing time for people, or we're even going to say, we work hard to make space for neurodivergent folks, and we're going to try and, continually do better. Can feel performative when you're not used to doing it. And then I think one can come to realize, like, actually for the people who it matters, that's not performative. That really does make a difference because you're actually trying to show that you're willing to try.
I will say it is incredibly difficult and exhausting to deal with the challenges and the ableism in academia, like really challenging, I would say, and it's exhausting. I don't know how else to say that. And it really sometimes requires meeting people where they're at. Being persistent with resistance from others. I think it requires a lot of patience in that regard. I think I think it's required a lot of persistence and finding ways to collaborate and ways, honestly, first where people value me and then using that as an opportunity for bigger change in conversations. But it is a very slow and difficult process. There are lots of situations that I have found myself in with people, some of whom have made massive changes, and some people who are like, this is the system, this is what you're going to deal with, and if you can't deal with it, that's what it is. And I think, but I do think persistence, and I found in the long run that doing those things and finding ways to value each other and to be persistent and resilient in that way has led to more positive change than not. But I don't have an easy solution for how exhausting and the impact on mental health and well-being it really is.
I think that's a good place to.
Yeah.
I think that's a perfect place to stop. Thank you so much, Ava and Matt, for sharing a real example of a relationship. As you said, you know, you could have come in and told us kind of a rosy colored view of how everything is perfect, but you showed us how your relationship has evolved, and really appreciate what you have shared with all of us today. If everyone is open to giving us some feedback, there is a feedback form link in the chat. And unless there are any other SIG announcements, I think that's all for today.
Just a quick reminder that this was first in a fantastic series, as Ava and Matt were plugging for us. We do have partners of theirs coming to join us on 2 subsequent dates. So it's 2 weeks from now in September, and again, October 17th. So September 26th and October 17th. So do come back and join us for those. We're so excited to continue this conversation. And Ava and Matt, thank you so much for sharing your insights with us. We loved it.
Thank you for taking the time. And for your patience with us and getting the stuff ready.
Yes, and please come see our two other pairs of colleagues who have really important stories, real stories to share about their partnerships.
I promise it won't all be the same.
Oh, it's definitely not. We already know that.
Thanks, everyone. Have a wonderful Friday and weekend. Take care.